It seems like only yesterday that the new Busch Stadium and Ballpark Village projects all came together. But the Cardinals are reportedly gearing up to ask for another $500 to $600 million in public funds. What's it for, and how is it going to play with the taxpayers? Coming up on Be Safe Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of Be Safe Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you, the evening hours of Monday, April 29th, 2024. No Cardinal baseball to talk about today, at least on the diamond between the white lines, because, well, they didn't do anything between the white lines on Monday. Cardinals rained out in Detroit. We're supposed to begin that series against the Tigers earlier this evening. It didn't happen due to rain. It'll be a doubleheader. A straight doubleheader on Tuesday. I believe Jack Flaherty scheduled to pitch one of those games for the Tigers. The Cardinals will send Steven Matz and I believe Kyle Gibson to the Hill. Not sure the order on those two starters for the Cardinals on Tuesday, but that's the ticket. So no baseball talk today, but there is Cardinals talk. Because I wanted to get into a topic that became news a couple of weeks ago, but with the daily grind of covering all these games, we haven't really had a chance to get into it. There was an article that came out in the Riverfront Times, to their website at least, I know, that reported that the Cardinals are gearing up to ask for some public money for Busch Stadium renovations. The title of the article, which was released April 17th, written by Eric Berger, as Cardinals plan to seek more public money for Busch Stadium, experts balk. It's the title of the article in the Riverfront Times. Team leaders claim the 2006 stadium expenditure would revitalize downtown, yet the neighborhood has struggled. That's the premise of this article in the RFT. Story was commissioned by the River City Journalism Fund. So this is some legit journalism here going on that I hadn't heard heads or tails of this potential ask by the St. Louis Cardinals for public money to make some renovations and some upgrades to Busch Stadium. If it had been reported previously, I just hadn't heard of it, but this is the first I ended up seeing that this was maybe something that would be coming down the pike. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what exactly is in this article, what to maybe expect the Cardinals are looking to do, and what we think of it. Because this is kind of a hot button topic in sports over the past however many years, as you have teams across major sports, not just MLB, not just hockey, with the situation they're dealing with in the NHL, the Arizona team, the Coyotes, looking like they're going to move to Salt Lake. We know that the Athletics are dealing with a whole situation or perpetrating one. Going to play some games in Sacramento for a couple of years before they leave the state of California to go to Las Vegas. We know the Raiders of the NFL went to Las Vegas from Oakland. We know, obviously, in St. Louis that the Rams left town heading to Los Angeles. So relocation has been something in sports that we've just gotten used to. It's not new over the past 5, 10, 15 years, but it certainly seems like there have been a number of instances across these major sports, and even in the NBA, we've seen it from time to time. Way back, it was the Seattle Supersonics that are now the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I believe the Warriors' new arena moved not too far, but to the other side of the bay, which was a big deal to the people that live out there in the Bay Area. That was a number of years ago. So this is always something that's been going on in the periphery. And it sort of has seemed as though, at this point where we're at, is the billionaire owners get the chance to hold a city hostage to get what they want for their stadiums or their ballpark villages or their entertainment districts, whatever the case might be. And for the most part, taxpayers sort of go along with it. Every time the owners, and look, not all of them are billionaires, but pretty much, you've got to be having a B in front of your name there in order to afford to own a team in the current day, for the most part. All these teams are worth at least $1 billion, it seems. Certainly, a lot of these baseball clubs, NFL teams, A lot of money in sports. They say not a profitable industry, but I'm going to beg to differ. And one of the elements that always seems to come along with this industry is the idea that the owners of the teams turn to the public to try and get their real estate ventures funded. And it's a real good racket because you own the stadium. After you own the team plays in the stadium, but you maybe didn't have to pay for the whole stadium. And the thought is, well, these stadiums and these teams are important to cities and to regions, civic pride, and, hey, the economic development that comes with having a team around. And that was the whole premise when the Cardinals convinced taxpayers or the public to get on board with funding the Busch Stadium project in the first place. Back in 2000, this was a topic of conversation where at the time, ownership and president, I think it was Mark Lamping at the time, said, hey, to make it viable, this is a quote from 2000 that they put into this RFT article, it's going to have to be done because if we don't, we are putting the franchise at risk. Busch Stadium is fine now, but it won't be fine at some point in the future. If the team did not obtain public funding for a new stadium, they would have to slash payroll and raise ticket prices, they said. Quote, the only place we can go to generate more money is to put it on the backs of fans, and we can't afford to do that anymore. So what happens then? You kind of can hold the area hostage, right? Remember how they threatened to move the Cardinals to the hillside across the river to Illinois? Lamping met with then Illinois Governor George Ryan about building a stadium just across the Mississippi River. Lamping told the Post-Dispatch in 2002 the team would continue to negotiate with city and state leaders in Missouri. Quote, but if we can't get it done and we're faced with the choice of failing in downtown St. Louis or succeeding a mile east, we believe that a ballpark site in Illinois can be viable. Right? And for people on the Missouri side, that's kind of a scary situation. Look, we want to keep the team. We want to keep the tax money and all the revenue that comes along with having the team in the state, right? Sure, they would only be a couple miles the other direction, but beyond just the inconvenience of it, state pride and having them in downtown St. Louis, all of these things, okay, we'll do what you want. That's kind of the playbook, right? We saw it play out 20 years ago, and Busch Stadium got built, and Ballpark Village got built. But these professors that are the experts sort of in their field, right? And I was a sport management major at Mizzou, so a lot of this has sounded pretty familiar to me because I remember being back in college talking about, these owners and teams are always going to threaten to move. We're seeing it with the Chiefs and Royals right now, actually. When Jackson County, it was like a month ago, they voted down a sales tax that was proposed to do upgrades to Arrowhead Stadium and get the Royals a new downtown stadium. This was an existing sales tax that was already in place, but to continue it, they needed to vote it through. And I think what happened is the Royals said, hey, Chiefs, can you join our venture here and say you need some stuff for Arrowhead Stadium, which, by the way, if you saw the video the Chiefs posted of their new receiver, Xavier Worthy, they were around the locker room. I think it's the practice facility locker room. I don't believe it's the game day locker room. But nevertheless, it looks like a high school locker room, whereas Xavier Worthy is coming from the Texas Longhorns, where they have some of the best facilities in the sport, college or professional or otherwise. And he's looking around going, what just happened? I just got a big downgrade. So it's not to say that Arrowhead Stadium couldn't use some upgrades, but I think they just didn't get the word out and plan well enough and sort of took for granted that, hey, if we have the Chiefs on this joint venture, taxpayers will vote it through. And I think people were kind of irked by what the plan was and to maybe take away some small businesses from that area downtown in KC where they want to put the new Royals Stadium. And it just had so much negative pub that it got voted down. So I don't know what the next step there is, but what are those teams already doing? I believe it was the wife of the owner of the Kansas City Royals who posted something on Facebook that I guess her page was public and it got out what she had said was that, well, we might have to move the team to Kansas. It's going to be a shame if that has to be the result of this, but they voted it down. That the people have spoken. We maybe and they start to threaten to move. And in some cases, it's just empty threats to get the leverage you want. In other cases, we've seen it. Rams have moved. Raiders have moved. Oakland Athletics are about to be the Sacramento or the Vegas A's thereafter. We've seen it time and time again in sports. It's one of those things that makes you feel kind of grimy as a sports fan because you're like, man, don't they have the money to be able to fund some of this stuff? It's got to be on the taxpayers, really. But here's the situation with Busch Stadium. It's 18 years old, right? This isn't a very old stadium. But here come the Cardinals reportedly ready to ask for some money in order to do some renovations, do some upgrades to Busch Stadium. From the article, and I'll read some snippets that we'll talk about to give you an idea of what's going on here. The River City Journalism Fund has learned that the Cardinals owners hope to make significant renovations to Busch Stadium in the next 5 years and will likely seek public funding for the project, which they say is necessary to keep the stadium viable. The 18-year-old stadium. Ouch. They didn't spend that money very well the first time, I suppose. I don't know. This may come as a shock considering the stadium isn't very old. This is back from the article now that I'm reading. Opened in 2006, and they've built an entire little Disneyland around it, right? That part's not in the article. That part was me. Now, keep this in mind as we get into this and what the claim is in this article and what Bill DeWitt III has to say about it, Cardinals team president and the son of Bill DeWitt Jr., the chairman of the club. This is some journalism taking place, uncovering this info, more than it is the Cardinals being ready to actually announce that they're going to ask for this money and explain why they need it. I'm not exactly sure how it came to be that the reporters did their digging and found the information, but they did. So here's what the claim is in this article. For the positive momentum to continue, I don't know, I guess that's the positive momentum of what's going on with the team and with that little downtown district. Bill DeWitt III says Busch Stadium will need, quote, a significant capital infusion in 2 to 5 years, but it's, quote, too early to detail what the improvements would look like, according to the article. Quote, our goal would be to handle whatever back-of-the-house things need to happen and to fix them, as well as probably create some cool and interesting new features for fans. The owners would likely seek public money for that, he adds. Here's the kicker. When asked for how much such a project would cost, DeWitt III says it would likely be in a similar range to recent Milwaukee Brewers and Baltimore Orioles projects. And the article states that those were $500 million and $600 million taxpayer investments, respectively. So what's it for? First of all, $500 to $600 million. It's a big number. For what? And that quote is, our goal would be to handle whatever back-of-the-house things need to happen and to fix them, as well as probably create some cool and interesting new features for fans. So this is not a proposal that's ready to go public yet, is my sense, because, well, it's kind of vague. It's not very specific in what, and when you say a big number like $500 to $600 million, which in fairness, DeWitt III did not say, but if he said, well, kind of like the Brewers and the Orioles, what they did, $500 and $600 million investments, respectively. So that is pretty significant. And it's interesting because to compare it to Baltimore and Milwaukee is not really comparable to where Busch Stadium in the Ballpark Village area is at present. Those stadiums in Baltimore and Milwaukee are 5 years and 14 years older than Busch, respectively. I don't know which one is older. I just know 5 and 14. Now, I think what they're going to be doing in one of those places, at least, is to sort of build the Ballpark Village-y type of thing that a lot of teams and a lot of stadiums are getting in the surrounding areas, right? The Braves kind of took it to the next level, and it's very kind of walkable in that Truist Park area. Now, not walkable in the sense of, oh, you're downtown or you're in a neighborhood, and then here you go. No, it's kind of out in the suburbs, but they've built such a massive deal around it that it's kind of like a shopping mall, an outdoor shopping mall sort of outletsy vibe with bars and restaurants and stores right there in the ballpark district. They just had enough empty land in the suburbs, I suppose, to be able to plop it there. So if you're in the little Disneyland, then it's walkable. But to get to it, you're driving out to the suburbs, which made a lot of people in Atlanta upset. Obviously, people that live near the city were not maybe as fond of where they put the darn thing. But the Orioles, I think, are getting the ballpark village type of deal. And with the Milwaukee Brewers, a little bit of an older stadium, doing some upgrades there. I think they're changing the seats or doing some in-stadium areas. Like the Cardinals at Busch have these areas, right? If you've been to Busch Stadium, you know what I'm talking about. They've got the new 703 Club, and they've got it out in right field, the Budweiser deck, where you can stand around and watch the game from right field. There aren't just a bunch of seats everywhere. They've got the amenities sort of things going on. Now, could Busch Stadium maybe stand to add more of those and say like the upper deck, maybe above Big Mac Land, take out some seats? Maybe you could, but I think when the Cardinals are humming, they're going to fill that ballpark. So is it necessary to do that? Nah, maybe, maybe not. Take out seats means less attendance in playoff games and such. But if the finances of it work out, maybe that's something the Cardinals pursue. But my point is, like, I don't exactly know. And again, it doesn't sound like the Cardinals are ready to announce either, because this wasn't the Cardinals saying, hey, we have an announcement to make. This was a piece of journalism being done, and the Cardinals, Bill DeWitt III, the team president, answering to it and giving some information when asked, I presume, is the way this came together. So they're not really ready, but people are going to want to know, all right, if you're asking for $500 million, $600 million, whatever the case may be, what is it? What's it for? And when they say, well, it's kind of infrastructure, back of house sort of things, like the things that fans are never going to see, it doesn't mean those things aren't needed. And as somebody who does see the bowels of the stadium on a regular basis, there's some things going on down there that probably could stand to be addressed. Sometimes there's like a smell down there, and you're like, what's going on here? Isn't this a pretty new building? But just I don't doubt that there are some back of house stuff, as Bill DeWitt III puts in the quote in the article, that need to happen that the Cardinals want to take care of and renovate and upgrade infrastructure wise. It's just, I think, a little tricky to sell that to the public if this has to come to a taxpayer vote, a ballot initiative, whatever the case might end up being, kind of like you saw in Jackson County where that was turned down. The Chiefs and Royals are back at the drawing board to figure out what's next for their situations. But in the case of the Cardinals, you have the ballpark village. You have the entertainment district, so to speak. Stadium's only 18 years old, not as old as some of those other stadiums where it's going to cost Baltimore $600 million. That's because they're building a BPV type of deal. So that makes some level of sense. What's going to be added. And if you're into that, you think it'll stimulate the economy in Baltimore or whatever, then you're probably okay with it. Granted, when you ask these experts, these economists and folks, they typically say, yeah, it's kind of overblown, the idea of economic development when you build these stadiums and these projects. It's not really credible in the way that it typically comes out. This was part of the article that I'm going to read here as it pertained to Busch Stadium. The team claimed after the 2022 season that Busch Stadium had produced $43 million in tax revenue to the city and state that year, and a total of $545 million since the stadium opened in 2006, according to a report on the MLB's website. This adds the opening day press release from Explore St. Louis and Greater St. Louis Incorporated, which I think this was from 2022. Those two groups that promote economic development and tourism, they touted the Cardinals would generate $310 million in economic impact for the metro area because of items such as tickets, food, entertainment at or near the stadium, and out-of-town visitors staying in hotels, as well as, quote, indirect economic impact, meaning business-to-business purchases in the regional supply chain that stem from the initial direct purchases, end quote. There's an economist in this article named Bradbury who does not see either claim as credible because of research showing that stadiums just draw money away from other entertainment options rather than infusing new money that's coming in. And he says, plus, he has never seen any stadium generate that much revenue. So they've got economists, essentially. This fellow's name is Bradbury. I should be able to find his first name. J.C. Bradbury, Kennesaw State University economics professor who studies public funding of stadiums, doesn't think that the Cardinals ever would have left Missouri. He responded to that situation that happened in the early 2000s where they threatened to go to Illinois. He said, quote, I thought they had the best fans in baseball. That's what I hear every time they're on TV. I think fans and politicians need to understand that really what this is all about is just creating artificial justification for passing the buck along to taxpayers. So, some pretty damning language in the way that economists tend to talk. And again, I had a ton of sport business, sport management classes in college at Mizzou. And when I was reading this article, I thought, yep, I guarantee you that's what my professors would have said about this. Now, none of them were quoted in this article, but I did send one a message on Twitter hoping that I could get his take on this. He's not at Mizzou anymore. But I was kind of wondering because I'm like, this feels like the type of stuff that we were talking about 10, 15 years ago in sport business classes at Mizzou. The economic angle that is often played to justify, hey, spend this money, is maybe trumped up in the way that it's described. And to kind of compare it, I mentioned the Battery, which is what they call the development outside of Truist Park in Atlanta. Since opening in 2017, the park and the Battery, Atlanta, have produced an annual deficit of between 12 to 15 million for Cobb County. It's been studied to death, and economists, agree that public funding for a stadium is, quote, unlikely to be successful because for the most part, it's just changing how people spend their money locally. It's not stimulating any new economic development. And that's Bradbury again talking about that. And there's reporting in this RFT article that says in St. Louis, Cardinal leadership contends they paid for 90% of the stadium's original $400 million costs. But then there's a quote from Judith Grant Long, a University of Michigan associate professor of urban planning and sports management, who says that even when considering only some of the costs, 79% rather than 90% is the amount of Busch Stadium that was privately financed. And then there were some additional public costs like highway renovations, improvements that needed to happen to accommodate where the stadium was, which was $12 million. So the Cardinals financed a good portion of that Busch Stadium project, but maybe not as much as they would tout. And when you kind of look at the numbers, there was at least this one professor of sport management, urban planning, who said, yeah, it's more like 79% than 90%. That kind of feels like splitting hairs a little bit, though. That doesn't strike me as too big of a deal that those numbers come out a little bit different. But she says, I have found, this is a quote, that it's fairly typical for teams not to include infrastructure and land costs, but instead to focus on the building costs alone, since their contributions will then look bigger in size when the size of the pie is smaller. Long wrote that in an email to the River City Journalism Fund. So there's a lot more interesting stuff here in this article talking about whether they really revitalized downtown in sort of the way that it was claimed it was going to with Ballpark Village, because as we know, restaurants around the area like Mike Shannon's, there's some other examples, have since closed down because rather than, there's all this new stimulation coming into the economy downtown, people are just going to different places, and Ballpark Village is sort of the vacuum that everybody ends up at because it's really nice and it's right by the stadium and it's convenient and all of these things. So, and again, this isn't necessarily the Cardinals' fault, but when they look at these claims about economic development, they're like, well, actually, that's just, the money's just kind of being moved around. And it's consistent in terms of the studies that have been done for this over and over again, not specific to just St. Louis and Ballpark Village, but that's kind of the way it goes over and over again. You won't find many professors of sport management or sport econ that say, oh no, the economic development for stadium and stuff, it's a big deal. It's a big help. You typically won't find that. And in fact, I remember talking in school about all the cities that end up hosting the Olympics. They have to build all these stadiums, and the cities often really struggle in the years that follow their Olympic Games because, well, they're not really using those stadiums anymore, and they just kind of sit empty, and you kind of tear up the city to do it. Maybe you're tearing some buildings down or some, the infrastructure of the city itself changes, and you spend a bunch of money to then just kind of have those vacant buildings that you really don't have any use for. It's kind of a fine line to say, we get to host the Olympics, but then it's over and over we see some of those cities end up kind of worse for the wear as a result. So this part of it maybe not too interesting. You guys probably want to hear more about the Cardinals element of it, why they feel they need this money and what they're going to do with it. But I just wanted to hone in on the notion of economic impact is going to be touted. And there are questions as to whether Ballpark Village and Busch Stadium ultimately provided that the way that it was sort of proposed that it would back when the project was in its infancy and had not been realized yet. So I don't know. People have their different experience from going downtown and going to Cardinals games. And so a variety of Cardinals fans might have their own different anecdotal thoughts on the whole deal. But it's interesting that that's maybe not the economic angle of it is not always perhaps what it seems when the projects are being touted. So I guess the question is going to be, is there going to be an appetite from Cardinal fans, and really not just Cardinal fans, but taxpayers in general, to stomach this type of infusion that may be asked of taxpayers at some point in time? I kind of think if the Cardinals were playing better, you can almost find a way to sell it easier. And maybe that's what will happen. Again, 2 to 5 years, this doesn't have to come out tomorrow. The Cardinals are working in the background on this. But I think when they release it, they have a better chance of being successful if a few different things are true. Well, one, the economy. If the economy's better, I think it's more plausible that whatever form or fashion this should play out in, if it's a vote or whatever it is, that folks might be more amenable to it if the economy's better at the time. We really have no way of knowing that at this point in time. But another element is like, are the Cardinals playing well? Do people feel satisfied by, hey, ownership takes our fandom seriously and they're spending competitively on payroll to where, yeah, maybe this is a good thing. We're pretty satisfied with where the Cardinals are at right now, and we want to make sure we keep them viable, whatever that means. Again, it's different than the Milwaukee and these other stadium situations. The Cardinals aren't leaving St. Louis. It was probably a bluff the first time, and it worked to get whatever version of the public money they needed for the rest of the stadium project. If they paid 79%, then maybe the rest of it is where the public money came in. Were they ever really going to move? Come on, I was a kid at the time, but I'm skeptical that ever would have happened. In the same way that I'm skeptical that the Royals are going to leave Kansas City. Now, could they go to the Kansas side of the border? It would be gross, but it could happen, I suppose. But that's sort of the rub, is they're willing to sort of play this game of chicken if they don't get what they want in terms of the public funding and the taxpayers and the votes and everything that has to go their way for these things. And it kind of puts everybody in a sticky situation, because I think the way most common folk feel is like, well, couldn't they just fund their own projects? And they can turn around and say, well, sure, but, it's pretty expensive, and you guys really do like having us around, don't you? And it's kind of this kind of gross little dance that can happen. And I'm not saying specific to the Cardinals that this is what's going to happen, but that kind of is the way it went in 2002. Again, I was a kid at the time, but I can read back to say, yeah, this was kind of weird the way they did that. And we're talking about the economic development and the impact, and that part of it might be a little bit, I'm not going to say it's fraudulent, but I think it's a little bit, fluffed up to make it look like more than it is sometimes. Again, that's not specific to the Cardinals, but just across the board when you look at these. Quote, and this is from, who's this? Bradbury again, from this RFT article. Quote, these types of fantasy documents that are put out, pretty common. No economist takes them seriously. The documents that talk about the economic impact. It's just kind of, fluff and maybe not very concrete data-wise. And it makes sense, right? If you look at Ballpark Village exists, but those other restaurants maybe don't. It's not that, everybody can eat and everybody can win. Well, it can be a little dog-eat-dog, perhaps, if there's not actually new money being stimulated and coming in. And I think that's probably the way that it ultimately went there. This is a quote from Eric Click of Webster University. By creating these villages, which is a strategy now for sports teams, what do they really do? They absorb even more customers, and they generally impact local businesses. So they're kind of the vacuum that, hey, they're the new thing, the cool thing. I went to this other restaurant, but now I'm going here. It's more convenient anyway because it's right by the ballpark. Like, I think that probably is what ends up happening there a little bit. I know I keep kind of getting back into that tangent of the economics of it, but I think it is very interesting, and I had a lot of it in my notes here to talk about. So that's one of the elements that I'm looking toward. But nevertheless, I think what this boils down to is, how's the economy doing? What's the timing of this release, and how are the Cardinals playing at the time, as ridiculous as that sounds? I feel like people are going to be happier to support something if the team is doing well, and they feel that as fans, they are heard by an ownership that's willing to spend on a competitive team and spend and invest in the product, not just on the infrastructure stuff and the real estate end of it, but the team itself on the field. That's valuable to St. Louis fans. I think that was part, like I said, I think that was part of why the Royals included the Chiefs, because they're a winning team right now. They've won 2 Super Bowls in a row. So, hey, if we go in on this project together, we really need a new stadium. You guys can just say you need some whatever. And I think they kind of threw it together and didn't maybe take it seriously, thinking this will be a shoo-in. If the Chiefs put their name on it, there's not going to be any issues. But they let the narrative sort of slip away from them, and ultimately that thing got voted down about a month ago. I think the Cardinals are probably noticing that going on the other side of the state. They're going to have a better plan as to how they unveil this and produce this, but it is something being reported on already, so something to keep an eye on. How would you feel, Cardinals fans, if you're living in St. Louis City, if this is something that ends up becoming a taxpayer burden? That $500 to $600 million is a big time crazy number to me. And I think what could end up being the issue if the Cardinals aren't careful in the way that they approach this is the messaging of, all right, why do we need this $500 to $600 million, and what will the fans get out of it? I think that the Cardinals and DeWitt III, in the quote that he gave, seem to know that a lot of what's necessary is actually stuff that fans may not notice, but they're going to have to, in order to get the support, I think, of taxpayers and the public, they're going to probably have to say, also, here are some cool things that we're doing with this money that you guys are going to get the benefit of. And what that exactly looks like when they've already got the ballpark village and they've already got a lot of these fan zones in the ballpark, what's that going to take the form of that's going to be compelling to people? I think is the key. If you have one takeaway from this video, that would be where I'm at, is like, what's that going to look like that's actually going to tell people, here's what you need, here's why you need it, and convince them that it's true. Because you're not going to win people over of, hey, this is going to be $500 million, and we really could use your help on this, everybody. But it's just going to kind of be some stuff that we'll benefit from, and it'll keep the stadium, from smelling bad or whatever. Like, whatever the infrastructure stuff is, it's not sexy, it's not interesting, so you probably don't lead with that. DeWitt said, well, there's some back-of-house stuff that we need to do, and we'll probably, he says, have some cool things for fans too. The cool things for fans is going to need to be the lead by the time the Cardinals are ready to unveil what this exactly is for. And I think that's the best way to get them to convince people to agree to invest their money in it as taxpayers. Don't exactly know what form it's going to take. Again, it's very vague for now because I don't think the Cardinals were ready to announce, right? They haven't announced it, but it was just a report in the Riverfront Times that caught my eye and I think is certainly interesting. Again, too early to detail what the improvements would look like. Handle the back-of-house things that need to happen and fix, and probably create some cool and interesting new features for fans. That's going to be the key. That's going to be the key. And I honestly, if that's the order that it goes in, may not work out, because I feel like that's exactly what it was for Kansas City. And they said, well, okay, the Arrowhead Stadium needs this and this, and we're going to build a new outdoor kind of football field where the Kauffman Stadium used to be, and knock that thing down and have a little outdoor, it just kind of seemed a little bit tacky to me with the way the Kansas City folks approached it. And maybe fans and taxpayers, more importantly, the public, felt the same way because they voted it down. I think if the Cardinals are going to be successful with this, they're going to have to be a little more targeted in their approach than that whole Jackson County situation happened on the other side of the state. But Cardinals fans listening to this, do you want them to be successful? Do you think that the Cardinals getting public money of that, $500 to $600 million is the comparison, whereas those teams are getting maybe a ballpark village outside of their newish refurbished digs. Cardinals already have that. So is it going to be compelling enough to the people that have a chance to vote on this that it'll go through? I think it's very interesting. I think the mistake would be to have any sort of hot take about whether this is ridiculous or whether this is because we really don't know. It's very clear in this RFT article, which everybody should read. I will link the article in the description to this YouTube video so that everybody's able to see everything that's in there. A lot of interesting stuff in the article that I did not end up getting into in this video. But I think it's very, very compelling that RFT gets a hold of this, or the Journalism Fund. I'll make sure I credit once again the River City Journalism Fund that commissioned the story. It's interesting. It's interesting that this is kind of coming to light, especially during a time where everybody's kind of angsty and up in arms about the actual performance of the team and whether or not they're going to be able to straighten things out from a competitive standpoint. And if the general feelings about the Cardinals, which have been very, very positive over my lifetime, for the most part, people love their Cardinals and love how much they win. And that's part of why you get the moniker best fans in baseball, because you're always cheering for winning teams. But if that goes away a little bit, and we just did a recent video hypothetically, could the Cardinals reduce payroll for 2025? Like, if those things are happening, what's the appetite going to be for fans and then taxpayers who are not fans of sports or baseball or the Cardinals to turn around and say, yeah, this is fine, we'll vote this through because we think it is, even if I'm not a sports fan, I say, hey, value is a value to the economy and to the locals, whatever, civic pride. Like, there are reasons that non-sports fans might vote to have something like this included. But the other part of it is, what are they going to do? Leave? Right? Like, that might be the attitude of some people, especially if the team is not producing on the field. Will that turn some folks maybe toward bitterness over, oh, they're asking for money? Well, what are they going to do? You know, they can't even get a good team out on the field. Like, I'm trying to guess at what some of the attitudes could be from the public, and that might be the sentiment for some people as well. So I'm very curious. This isn't like the Cardinals are saying, we need this money or we're gone. No, you just built the stadium 18 years ago. It's pretty much brand new still. I'm very curious to see the way this is going to play out and if the Cardinals can come up with a targeted enough description of what their plan is by the time they're ready to ask for this money to be able to actually pull it off and get the public to acquiesce to what the request is going to be. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are, Cardinals fans. I know this is not our typical type of video, but this was something very relevant to the team, and I thought folks might be interested. So let me know in the comments below. You can hit subscribe to this channel by clicking the red button in the lower right-hand corner of the video. And make sure you never miss some Cardinals content all year long. Doubleheader coming up on Tuesday, and then a day game on Wednesday. So going to be a little bit of a weird posting schedule, perhaps. But Tuesday night, we can post another Be Safe Daily and talk about 2 Cardinal games for the price of 1. So that's going to do it, though, for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always. Again, different topic today, but hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll post the links in the description. Also, the link to listen to the podcast ad-free on Spotify, if you'd like to do that. And keep giving me your ideas for YouTube memberships. We talked about it on the live stream the other night, and that is something I'm going to get started here pretty soon. But for now, that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you as always, and we'll talk to you next time on Be Safe Daily. Peace.